Well, welcome to another Friday night. Tonight I want to talk about something that happens with complex trauma for people who didn't experience secure attachment as a child. So they had insecure, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment. And one of the things that they often will do is develop kind of pseudo connection feeling type things. And one of those is to develop connections or bonds in their fantasy. So they feel connected to a person where there's no true connection, but it's all in their fantasy world where all of this connection is happening. As I explained it, I think many of you are going to find out that, this is describing me a little bit. It's probably a bigger issue than most people are aware of. And that's why I want to talk about it. And there's really two types of kind of fantasy type bonds that can take place coming out of complex trauma. So the first is limerence, and we've talked about that in the past. And it's really that state of intense, almost involuntary romantic infatuation with another person, which then causes you to become obsessed with them and have this strong desire to connect with them and have them reciprocate your feelings. And so some of the characteristics of limerence is just, you can't help but thinking about the person all the time. It's just intrusive thoughts about them. And then your emotions go up and down depending on if they're giving you attention, if they're reciprocating at all, if they're noticing you, or if they're ignoring you, not responding. It's that huge emotional roller coaster, highs and lows. And then you tend to put on rose-colored glasses when you think of this person and only see their good characteristics and idealize them and put them on a pedestal, and they're almost perfect in your mind, and you minimize any flaws. And if friends point out flaws, you just deny it or ignore it. And it's very much like addiction. It's dopamine driven. So thinking about them, seeing them, gives you a shot of dopamine that just sends you into this pleasure place that you keep needing to feed and reinforce. It's this deep attraction, infatuation that creates then a fantasy in your mind that you're in love with this person, that they're going to love you back, that you're so close, it's going to be so wonderful. And so this is very common with insecure attachment styles. So again, just let me give you some examples. So let's say that you meet somebody very pretty and you feel this attraction to them. You hope they're attracted to you, but then you start to build this fantasy in your mind, this story in your mind of this very close, affectionate relationship where you share everything. And then usually what happens in that fantasy is they're perfect in the sense that they fully meet your needs. They do what you want them to do. They submit to you. They let you decide their role in life, what they should be like. And they do it perfectly. And it just is this wonderful, wonderful relationship. So that's kind of where this limerence goes. It happens a lot, I think, nowadays for people who are on dating apps or on dating websites. They see somebody, they read a bit of a bio about them, they look at pictures of them, see them smiling, see them doing different things, and they start creating this story in their mind of how in love they are with this person, how close their relationship is. It's a fantasy bond that is created out of limerence. You can even see it in children, teenagers, when they fall in love with a rock star, a movie star, an athlete. And then as they get a bit older into their 20s, women throw their panties at these athletes, and then they develop these stories in their mind of how this athlete loves them and wants them and knows them intimately, and it's such a wonderful relationship, and they feel so close to them, and they've already built and feel like they have this intimate relationship with a person. But let me take it kind of in a darker twist. What you find if you think of a child predator, they see a child that they just adore. Then they build in their mind that this child adores them back. And so if they're nice to the child and the child's polite, they then interpret that the child is adoring them and wants this relationship, and it's so close, but yet in their mind is the child conforms to every little thing they want. They control every aspect of the child's life, and the child perfectly does it willingly. You also see it in narcissism, where a narcissist thinks that anybody that's polite to them, that says hi to them, that asks them how they're doing, must adore me, must think I'm wonderful, must be in love with me. Oh, they looked at me today. They smiled extra bright today when they saw me. Wow, they just adore me. And they start to build this story in their mind that we have a relationship. We are in love. It is so close. But yet there's a control element that they're doing what I want. They're there for me, and I'm in perfect control. So that's limerence. The second one, which is not so familiar, has been given a term by Dr. Robert Firestone, the first person that really came up with this. And I'm not crazy about the term, but I'm going to use it because it's called fantasy bonding. And to me, it's really just a very limited form of fantasy bonds. But it's basically, you think of a person who's in a relationship where their needs aren't being met, where they're being hurt, they're being neglected, they're being abused, but they do everything together. There's a routine every day. There's going through the motions of a relationship. And so they feel we're so close. So there's a sense that there's a bond here when there's really no intimate attachment. And so it's been referred to as a defensive attachment pattern where a person replaces real emotional intimacy with an illusion of connection based on roles, routines, or control rather than vulnerability. So the relationship becomes habit-based rather than emotional engagement-based. That's the key distinction. So again, an illusion of connection that's a substitute for real connection. It often involves an idealized picture of closeness, even though the relationship could be distant, neglectful, or abusive. You create the fantasy of closeness. So let me give you a couple examples of this. This is so common with a child who parents aren't there to meet the child's needs. One might be neglectful, one might be abusive, whatever. But the child needs them. The child is dependent on them. And so the child, because they live together, the parent's nice once in a while, the child creates a fantasy that they're closer than they really are. Because to be honest about I'm being neglected and abused is just too terrifying. Then they'd be all alone. So they have to survive. In order to survive, they have to create this fantasy bond in their mind that I am really, really close to this parent. This can also happen in emotionally kind of distant families, but they're enmeshed. They're in everybody's business. They're doing lots of stuff together. They play games together. They laugh together, but nobody's sharing vulnerably. But yet then they create a fantasy. Look how close we are. Or in adult life, you could get a person who's in an abusive relationship and they create a trauma bond that this person's meeting my needs. This person is all I have. This person's been nice to me in the past. This person I think will be nice to me again. And they create a fantasy that this is a wonderful person. This is a close relationship. But you can see it's a defensive mechanism. And so here, just side by side, limerence versus fantasy bonding. So the two types of fantasy bonds. So the limerence often starts very early, whereas fantasy bonding, that can happen a bit later on. And then Limerence, that obsessive desire for reciprocation, whereas false bonding, the real driving force is fear of vulnerability, but fear of abandonment as well. And then the emotional tone of the limerence is intensity, euphoria, but anxiety laden. Whereas with fantasy bonding, there's just a numbness, a pseudo intimacy, a controlling environment. And so the attachment style for limerence was anxious. The attachment style for fantasy bonding was avoidant. So the avoidant is there's just an emotional deadness that I'm trying to protect from getting hurt even worse by looking at it honestly. So those are the two things. So let me go back to complex trauma and really try to explain how these two things can happen. So we've said over and over again that a child is born with these strong needs and drives. So they have this strong need for connection, because if I don't connect, I'm going to die. I can't meet any of my own needs on my own. And so with that, there's that strong need, desire to be loved, a longing to be loved that is in this child. But what sadly happens in complex trauma is the child can't connect. Mom and dad are too busy, got their own issues, there's neglect, there's abuse. So there's secure attachment does not happen, the strongest drive and need in a child. So what happens as a result of that? A whole bunch of different things that we've outlined over the years. So they go to shame. It must be my fault. I must not be good enough. I must not be lovable. I must not be valuable. They go to fear. Everybody that gets to know me is going to treat me the same way and abandon me. So what happens now in this child is this desire to connect doesn't go away. In fact, often it becomes stronger. But now it's accompanied by fear. So I long to connect, but I'm afraid to connect. So those two things go together. So now what a child will do is, okay, I will fawn. I will develop pseudo connections. I will connect by conforming to the group norms, by being what the group wants me to be. Then I'll be accepted. Then I'll be able to connect. But what that is connection without authenticity. And so you can't ever truly be yourself, which then isn't true connection. But it's better than nothing. Or I will just connect superficially with fun activities, lots of light interaction, where we feel close together by having interests around one area, where everybody can be very intense about that one thing, but that's really the only area of connection. So they develop all of those different types of kind of superficial connections, hoping that will satisfy. But then some go, you know what? Connecting to people, that I always seem to get hurt. It's always conditional. So I'm going to connect with things. I'm going to connect with activities. So I'm going to have a food addiction, a video game addiction, gambling, sex. I am going to buy things. I am going to connect to something. So I am driven to connect. If I can't connect with people, I will connect with an object or with an activity. And so many people do that. But some then go to the next thing, which is I will create fantasies of connection, which is what we're talking about. So I will develop stories in my brain where I am connected perfectly with another person. So let me show you the two ways that then this works itself out. So first, take the child with trying to connect with parents. Mom and dad are too busy. One's abusive, one's neglectful, whatever. But the child is being hurt by the very people they need to connect to, they're dependent on. So what sometimes a child would do is they will vilify one parent. This is a terrible person. This is why I'm getting hurt. And they will put the other parent on a pedestal. this is the perfect dad, wonderful. We have a wonderful relationship. Never say anything bad about their dad. Deny any of the bad things their dad does to them, because they need a hero. They need somebody they can look up to, somebody that they have a bond with. And so they vilify the one. That's the scapegoat. That's the reason for all the problems. The other parent's perfect. You can see there's a lot of denial happening. There's a lot of mental gymnastics happening. But a child, you can see also, partly has to do that to survive in very difficult circumstances. Then you come to the limerence. So that's the fantasy bonding. Then you come to the limerence part. And so you can see a child then, they go out, they have all this shame inside. They can't connect to mom and dad. They feel it's their fault. They don't like themselves. They have a fear of connecting. Then they go out into their school life, into their community, and somebody's nice to them. And it feels so good. Somebody takes time for them. Somebody gets them little gifts. Somebody validates them. Somebody laughs at their stories. It feels so good. They get this rush of good feelings, but I want to connect now to this person. And so they start to create a fantasy connection to this person. This is a wonderful person. This person can do no wrong. Meanwhile, this person could be very unhealthy. This person could actually be a predator. But because they give them that little bit of loving behavior that they've been longing for and not getting at home, it makes them vulnerable. Or they see somebody on TV, an athlete, a movie star, a music star, and they fall in love with them. They're so impacted by them, so impressed with them, in awe of them, that all of a sudden they're in love with them, and they start developing the stories in their head. Then they go to school and they see somebody so pretty that it just gives them this rush of dopamine and oxytocin, and now they start building a story in their mind that they have a relationship with this person. Or they have a teacher, they have somebody in the community, a coach that they look up to, they respect, they admire. They're so helped by this person that all of a sudden they put them on a pedestal, they look up to them, and they can even create stories about being in love with them. So their unmet need for love, their need to connect, when they meet somebody that seems to love them and they look up to and admire, all of a sudden they can get this fantasy starting to happen in their mind. Now, here's what the fantasy tends to look up. That this person that they admire, that they respect, that this person is always attentive to them, meets their needs perfectly, but this person conforms to their every need, every wish. This person serves them. And so they control the other person and how they behave and what they do. As they get older, often there then becomes a sexual component to this fantasy in their mind. But these two people in their mind adore each other, never have conflict, meet each other's needs perfectly, but you are always the one that's controlling all the dynamics. So somebody has said this about kind of how this looks like in their life. They put it as, if I was in this position thinking. So when I talk to someone I'm romantically attracted to, I tend to imagine how I could improve their life if the status of the relationship was different. This pattern is kind of surgical, as it ignores the fact that a relationship between two people must develop over time. Instead, the thinking pattern creates the illusion that if I would be lifted into a new status for the other person, I would have the power to influence their problems and guide them to a better life. I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to fix them. For example, if she would make me her boyfriend now, I would be able to make her life better. This kind of illusion is very disruptive, as it inevitably consists of control only. So that's what's going on in the fantasy. But what's actually going on deep inside the person that's having this fantasy? I hope you can see that it's a very different story. There's a lot of shame in there, maybe at a subconscious level, but they don't like themselves. They really feel unlovable. They feel that people get to know them are going to reject them. And so they often have a very strong inner critic. They're very hard on themselves, very judgmental of themselves. They often feel very alone, very unloved. Many of these people often isolate themselves, either geographically, they just pull away from people and then they build all these fantasies. That's their kind of relationship world. Or they can be with a lot of people, but they have walls around their heart. So they're isolated that way. And so now they're not being vulnerable. They're not being authentic. They're not being open. They're fawning. They're kind of playing the conforming to the norms of that group rules. But then they build all these fantasies of deeper connection. And so they meet somebody, fall in love, build all these fantasies, put them on a pedestal. But as soon as that person disappoints them once, they can knock them off the pedestal, vilify them, turn against them, and become super critical of them. So I hope you begin to see that the origin of these fantasy bonds is the fear of intimacy, but the fear of being alone. So I long for connection, I long for love, but I'm afraid of it. So the only solution in their mind is you can't actually work through that in real life. So create fantasy bonds that create the illusion of love and connection. So again, to summarize, when somebody grows up with inconsistent caregiving, emotional neglect, abuse, an unpredictable environment, they can create a fantasy bond to maintain safety and attachment, to try to get those needs met somehow. So I can't get safety in real life. I can't get attachment in real life. So let's create stories in my mind where I get those needs met. That seems like a very functional way of survival for a child. So fantasy bonds are basically then coping survival strategies. They help a child avoid the overwhelming pain of loneliness, rejection, betrayal. They make the child believe that they're getting their needs met, their safety, their attachment, their belonging. And so it's safer to believe in love that isn't there than to face the terror of accurately looking at the situation and seeing the neglect and abuse and abandonment. And so it's a survival strategy. And so it's always attached to attachment wounds. So how do you know kind of if you've gone to the limerence or the fantasy bonding? So let's start with kind of signs of the limerence. And we've touched on some of this, but I'll just go through it quickly. So number one, you have intrusive thoughts about this other person that you are falling in love with. And those thoughts are persistent, involuntary, intrusive, even make it difficult for you at times to focus on other things. Then you have that emotional dependence on how they respond to you. So you either go really high if they respond nicely or really low if they ignore you. So your emotions are dependent on how they respond. Then you idolize the person. You overestimate their positive qualities. You underestimate their flaws. You minimize them. You see them kind of as a soulmate, almost perfect person. And then you develop this obsessive need for clues. So you're constantly analyzing everything they do, looking for small signs that, oh, they're being positive to me, oh, they like me. And so you look at a look that they give you, a text that they send you, something on their social media page. You're reading constantly into every little thing they do, looking for some nuance that might be a clue about how they feel about you. And then you have the very strong physical and emotional responses. So you see them either on social media, online, or in person, and your heart races, you feel a rush of pleasure, you get nervous, you get anxious, and then when you're away from them, you have cravings, almost like an addiction, to see them, to go online, to look at their pictures. And then you fantasize about a future together. You daydream. You develop these stories in your head that are very detached from reality. And then you develop almost like an addiction, a dependence. You need your next hit. So you got to go on social media constantly to see their picture again in order to get another rush. And then you hate not knowing for sure. You don't want to be in the unknown. Do they like me or not? And so you're constantly wanting this to be a known thing without ambiguity. And so you just are constantly wanting to know for sure that they like you or that they don't like you. So that's limerence. Then let's go to the fantasy bonding. What are some of the signs that you might have fantasy bonding? So you confuse routine, roles, or proximity with real closeness. So we live together, we do lots of stuff together, so we must be close. That kind of logic. Or you idealize or romanticize a relationship that really is neglectful or abusive. So you play some mental games to make it better than it actually is. You refuse to see it accurately. Then you avoid honest communication and vulnerability in the relationship. So you do lots of stuff together, but there's no deep sharing that's vulnerable. Then you feel that you're very much not yourself. It's like you're a clone of them. You're a chameleon around them. You can't be authentic. So you're almost fused to their identity, but you're not truly seen or emotionally connected. That will be part of it. Many people use the relationship as a sense of identity. Oh, I'm so-and-so's partner. Oh, or a sense of security. Yeah, they got a good job. They got lots of money. And so I need that relationship for my own identity, for my own sense of security. So I need to fantasize that it's better than it is because I need security and identity. Again, you mistake routine or even controlling all that happens in the household, that you do sex a certain way when you want it, you do all these activities, you have game night together, so we have to be close. But again, there's no true authenticity or deep sharing. And then you stay attached to people that you know are harmful. And you merge identities, so you become what they want. You almost have to have the same interest, or else we wouldn't be close if we both did separate things. We both had separate, different friends. So we have to become more and more merged to feel close. And then you have this fantasy storybook narrative that you live in and avoid true self-expression. So I hope you see how these can be harmful. Fantasy bonds, so you feel close in your fantasy, but it's not true intimacy. It feels like intimacy, but it's not true intimacy, and it gets in the way of real intimacy. It avoids the components of true intimacy: vulnerability, emotional honesty. And so after a while, the relationship, you just have your fantasy where you feel close, but in reality, there's an emptiness. It's superficial. It's stagnant. You can't express yourself. You're merging with this other person. You're becoming what they want, what you feel you have to be to feel close, but you're not authentic. And so what you're beginning to realize is your fantasy is safer than reality. And so in your fantasy, you're a certain way, but in reality, you have to suppress who you really are. You can't voice your needs, your disappointments. And then what you're really doing is just perpetuating your insecure attachment issues from childhood. So you're going into fantasy to create senses of attachment, but you're not getting healthy in learning how to securely attach. You're just perpetuating insecure attachment in your life. And so all of it is basically preventing healthy relationships. You're not going to grow in intimacy, true intimacy. You're not going to grow in trust. You're not going to grow in learning to meet each other's needs and learning how to connect in healthy ways. So you're enabling harmful dynamics and just escaping to a fantasy. And that is so sad. And so fantasy bonds, they feel safer than a real relationship. They actually kind of act like they shield you from the risks of a real relationship. So that's why people are attracted to it. But it prevents authentic love, intimacy, and self-knowledge. It leads to greater loneliness. It leads to unhealthy dynamics that make you sicker over time. And it basically, the wounds don't heal. So what do we do to heal from fantasy bonding and limerence? Develop awareness. And that's why I do this talk, is so you can begin to realize, wow, I've got some of this in my life where I've created fantasy bonds. Work with a therapist. Get in a program like our LIFT program where you can start to deal with your attachment issues and your trauma issues. That's where you got to begin. There's not a magic fix. You got to learn to connect with yourself. You got to learn to connect with others in non-romantic ways. Then you gradually learn how to have healthy intimacy that then can grow into romantic relationships. That takes time. That takes a lot of work. That takes dealing with the trauma, with the shame, with the attachment wounds. You need help to do that. And so part of all of that is you're building authentic relationships with safe people where you can learn to attach and be honest and vulnerable and authentic and learn to communicate your needs and get needs met and be respected as an equal. But let me add one final thing. Part of healing from kind of having relationships in your brain and fantasy bonds for years, which many have done, means that they've gone for, let's say, 20, 30, 40 years without true intimacy. They've just had fantasy bonding or limerence. That means there's going to be a grieving period. I wasted years in fantasy about relationships, denial, not facing reality. Now what do? Look at I wasted all those years without true healthy relationships. So you're going to be grieving a little bit as part of this healing process. But realize it's never too late to start creating healthy relationships, healing attachment wounds. Even in your 50s and 60s, it is so rewarding. So I hope this helps you. If it helped you, please like, share, comment. It means so much to